this is clearly going to be a political decision, that's interesting in its own right. Because the point about HS2 and any reversal around HS2 is actually going to be based on the economics and the viability and the costs. That's not political. Actually, that requires data, economic information, economic modelling from the government. And very interesting to hear, obviously, that Andy Street is looking at an alternative, because quite frankly, I'm sure, and I don't want to prejudge anything because we simply don't know right now, it would seem to me that actually Rishi Sunak would have gone back to the Treasury, to Transport, to go over the numbers with the slide rule and actually look at the Manchester leg and see how could it be made to be much more efficient. Because saying to cancel it is a pretty drastic step forward. And of course, and it becomes political as well, because, you know, party conference, but also this is the government that basically says we may not go further with it. So I think there are a lot of questions to ask still around how has he reached that decision, what kind of work have they done, what kind of analysis, what kind of assumptions, and have they actually literally gone through all the scenarios around viability, and what is the case that they're going to make to say, no, we're not going to go ahead with it.
Okay, I want to move on, but before I just finally do, because I want to wrap this bit up quite quickly, you don't sound over-impressed, and forgive the oldest, corniest interview device in politics. Marks out of 10 for the way Downing Street has handled this. Marks out of 10 from you.
I'm not going to give a mark out of 10. I mean, I think there are so many questions in the air about this. I really do. I'm someone that has argued. I argue a lot for infrastructure. I'm an Essex MP, so I'm constantly putting bids together, you know, all sorts of suggestions, business cases. I do actually think, look, we're at a time when our economy is going through a degree of difficulty, not just regarding inflation, but low growth, productivity issues, skills issues. You know, these big projects sort of, you know, they put a mark down on the country. How open are you? You know, how gusto are you in terms of building things, getting stuff done?
And I know you've got your views on this, and they're not entirely on the same page as the present team in Downing. I want to come to that in a second,
of course.
Priti, but something which I know you're deeply interested in. It's an argument which is quite active here. It's about the future of Britain's membership of the European Convention of Human
Rights.
Right, have a listen to this then, Priti. I spoke a little earlier on to Tom Tugendhat, as you know, he's of course the security minister. He's a good friend, and this is what your good friend had to say. Right, so there's your
He's
pal.
not wrong,
your
by the
pal
way.
Tom.
He's not wrong.
But I'm going to come to that. He suggests that maybe, look, those of you who say let's get out of the convention haven't thought it through. That's his ultimate thought. Have a listen to this too. How do you get on with Andrew Mitchell?
I know Andrew well.
You know, well, I think we know what that means in politics.
We're colleagues.
Andrew Mitchell, the DFID minister, this is what he said. Andrew Mitchell. Well, there we go. He was saying
I've got
no
issue.
to pull a thread out of the
John,
international
I
system.
have no issue with the views of my colleagues at all.
Sure.
I've actually made the case, and I've said this previously, we should look at reforms of ECHR. I sat in the last government where, not myself, but other law officers were tasked with looking at derogations of ECHR. Now, when it comes to ECHR, this should not be an argument about the rights and the principles of ECHR.
But it is.
Let me. No. Actually, it depends on how you want to look at the discussion. Okay, we must have a wide discussion about ECHR. I think it's good that we're doing that. Actually, the issue is the Strasbourg court and how they interpret, actually, that make decisions that then have a detrimental impact on our own domestic laws. And I think actually this is the conundrum. This is a bit like an onion with lots of layers. You've got to peel back various layers, and some will make you cry more than others. If you look at, we've had this discussion many times before, 2011 and 12. Prisoner votes. You remember the debates. You've been around a few years, if I may suggest. You were reporting on that debate. David Cameron basically said we cannot let Strasbourg, we cannot let the ECHR, European Court, make the final say on what we do about prisoner voting rights.
Yeah, but he wasn't talking about putting out.
No. Actually, let me just finish my point as well. The same applies on foreign national offenders and how we remove them from our country. You will also recall, I'm sure you've reported on a few general elections in the past in 2010. We looked in our manifesto around ECHR. I'm pretty certain Theresa May did as well during her time.
Sure.
So this is a constant debate. But one very important point is that Britain post-Brexit, when we look at our laws, our sovereignty, we're still actually unwinding a lot of EU law right now from our domestic legislation. We have to look at the compatibility of aspects of the convention. I mentioned the word derogations, the D word, how that is effectively impacting upon the government of the day, the elected government of the day, and how the ECHR or various aspects of it or a court decision clashes up against our domestic policy decisions.
There's a couple of points there. One is the operation of the European Court, these injunctions which the British government doesn't like. That's one thing.
That's one
Can
aspect.
that be changed? There's an ultimate question. If we cannot get along, reach some sort of deal that works with the convention and the courts, the threat is to pull out altogether. That is the ultimate threat.
So I mean,
and if you do that,
we're speaking about spectrums now. We
sure.
really are.
But I'm cutting to the chase to that
you
extent.
are, but I'm sorry, but actually you do need context, and it's very easy, if I may say so, in the glamorous world of the media that you occupy, just say, is it just all about pulling out? You can have the pull-out option here, but you have to work backwards, look at the application of court decisions and judgments, and it's case by case. Let's be clear about this, case by case. Rule 39 on the Rwanda flight, that's one particular case that obviously is being challenged. It's the application of that judgment to our domestic laws. Our domestic laws vis-a-vis legislation. So, it's too simplistic for everyone just to say, let's just pull out. We have to look at this within the wider context and the steps that we can undertake.
In the end, you would if you had to, as you argue,
well,
and others say
it's
that
not
would
just
just
would
be
if you
fundamentally
had
wrong.
to. We have to come up with the alternative plan before you actually say, let's just pull out. Because the fact is, we still need to. We're players in the international world, in various organisations and forums. We speak about human rights all the time. The ECHR, by the way, applies to British citizens in our own country and the rights of our citizens. You cannot just basically say, that's it, and, to hell with everyone's rights. You do have to have Bill of Rights or other ways in which you can actually cover that.
That is your view. Others have a very different view, as you know. Your former colleagues in the cabinet.
I'm relaxed about all of that. I really am.
Well, you're relaxed also about a split in the party and in the cabinet, which is pretty fundamental. But splits happen, and they have on this occasion. Now, this morning you were on the platform, discussing your idea of the way to go for growth.
Yes.
And on that platform to Liz Truss. The cry was for tax cuts sooner, not later, to stimulate our economy.
I was asking for a longer-term plan around that.
Okay, but you want to see those tax cuts quickly as possible, and the Chancellor and the Prime Minister say, no, we've got to get inflation down, first, better to wait. Does that make sense?
I mean, look, again, I think this is now a wider discussion, actually, around the economy, direction of travel and where we're going. I do think it's right that the government focuses on inflation. The inflation levers are not all within the control of the government. You're aware of that. It's the Bank of England.
So you're content to let the Chancellor reach that judgment in his own time?
Well, first of all, Jeremy is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And he will see the macro and the micro economic data and the trends. He has an autumn statement coming up soon as well. I mean, I'm an ex-Treasury Minister. I've been there. I've seen how the Treasury works. We do also, bear in mind this is a political conference, this is a party political conference. We could be a year away from a general election. I do think it's incredibly important to restate this great dividing line between us and the Labour Party on the economy, which is we do fundamentally...
And between the Tories at that rally this morning and the Chancellor.
Actually, no. I disagree with that fundamentally, because if you look at my colleagues on the backbenches and in government, the Chancellor has said this as well. Fundamentally, we all believe in low taxes. This is a great differentiator between us and the Labour Party.
But it's when.
It's
about when.
We do believe in market fundamentals and growing the economy. We do believe in supporting businesses. We do believe in people keeping more of their income. And part of this, you see the slogans here, the long-term approach. We do need a long-term approach in terms of how we get back down. We're at a 70-year high right now on taxation.
Well, there was nothing very long-term about that mini-budget under Liz Truss and Kwasi. And let me ask you this. I introduced you earlier on, Priti, as a potential leadership contender. Was that fair?
No.
What, you have no wish? Are you ruling yourself out of any contest?
We don't know what's going to happen, first of all.
No, we don't.
No, John, I mean, I say this to everyone. I mean, I think we've known each other a little while. As you know, I've been a grassroots Conservative for well over 30 years. And clearly that dates me in terms of sort of, my background and my commitment to my party in particular. I want us to win the next general election. And actually, here we are at a party political conference. We have to come together to actually win that election. And the reality is times are tough. Times are difficult. Yeah. Post-pandemic, the Ukraine war, all of this is having an impact on our country.
You're not going to answer that question, on whether you fancy the job.
I don't know what will happen. I simply don't know what will happen. What I do want, though, is for us to win the general election. And, I'll play my part in that. I can tell you that
Sure.
now as a campaigner.
I know. Well, I'll tell you who really fancies the job. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary. And you're nodding. We all know Suella Braverman rather fancies the top job. Although just the other day, she made a really quite, a resonant speech saying multiculturalism in our country was a failure. You didn't like that, did you?
Well, it's not that I didn't like it. I mean, I take the view, and it's not just myself. Look at our diaspora communities in our country. They're quite successful, if I may just put that proposition out there. They contribute to our country. Actually, many of them set up businesses. Many of them invest in our country. I think that's something we should be proud of.
Well, I mean, with my background, I wouldn't disagree
there you go.
with that. However, that was the point that Suella Braverman made. What was she doing? Was she angling for support in a corner of the parliament? What do you think?
You should ask her, quite frankly, and I hope you'll get the opportunity to do so. I come on programmes and everybody wants to say you're rowing this, that and the other. She's a Home Secretary. It is one of the toughest jobs in government. She gives a speech on migration. That's what Home Secretaries do. And quite frankly, we just let her get on with her job, basically.
You wouldn't have said that, Priti, would you?
I'm not Home Secretary.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have said that.
Actually, again, let's have some context to this. She is focused on migration matters. Absolutely, she is. And she wanted to give a speech. That's absolutely her prerogative to do that.
She did want to give a speech.
But, my speeches were on different issues, quite frankly. At the time, I've spent my time, as you know, in government over 3 years. A lot of legislation ranging from terrorism, nationalising borders, to points-based system, you name it. Priorities shift in governments, don't they? And I think that's a reflection that we see.
Prati,